Hi there and welcome to the first video in the expressions section of Lightning Forms Help. We're going to start off in this video just having a look at the expression builder and getting to grips with the different places where we can build expressions inside of Lightning Forms. And in the next video we're going to have lots of different examples of those expressions. So we'll be using the expression builder against things like the initial values and the calculated values, and also some validation, enabled and visible properties of each of the different types of controls within inside our form. And in the third video we're going to jump into some of the more advanced JavaScript expressions and show you how we can build those as well. So what we're going to do first of all is just jump into the Lightning Forms tool. So we'll continue with the new form ASPX. So once we go into edit our customization, the form designer will load, and what we're going to do is just have a quick exploration as to where we can use the expressions and how we can also use the expression builder as well. So it starts off all the way at the very top, so against our command bar buttons. So as you've already seen, we've created some actions behind a submit for approval button. And what we can do is actually go into the edit option of each of those command buttons, and you'll see in here that we can control when those buttons are visible and when they're enabled, and that uses the expressions and the expression builder in order to be able to build out when this button is going to be visible and when this button is going to be enabled as well. And we'll explore this in just a moment in a bit more depth. So there's the command bar action buttons. There's of course in the styling section as well, which we've already explored a little bit of. So against each of the different styles you can add conditional styling. So not to this area here, but against the purchase order number, for example, we could go in and edit that and expand the section, and you'll notice here there's a rule or a condition, and in there is the expression builder again. So we can get into that expression builder and build out our expression as to when this style is applied to the field. So let's just discard that. We can also apply expressions to each row as well. So where we've got each row, as we hover over those rows, you'll notice the configure row expressions on the left hand side. So again, we've got the ability to control when the row and everything in that row is visible or when it's enabled as well. Against some of the different controls as well. So in here we've got configure expressions against the rich text, so we can control when the rich text is going to be visible. And of course against different fields or columns, so we can configure the expressions there. And here you can see we've got not just the visible and enabled, but also we can use this to set initial values, calculated values, when it's required, and also we can add validation rules and validation text as well, all of which is using expressions again. And as we go further down the page here, you'll notice that each tab also has expressions. So that's visible and enabled, so we can control when the tab is visible or enabled, and that of course contains or acts against everything it contains. The buttons on the form, so we've got the visible and enabled as we've already seen in there, and we've also got in sublists as well, so we can control when they're visible and when they're enabled. And we'll also be getting into, in the last video series, some of the lookup columns. So with regards to those, we've also got expressions that we can build, and of course there is with inside some of the actions inside our action buttons or the form load actions as well. So for example, if we go into the configure actions for our button here, if we take any of these, like the send email or something like that, notice that against each of these that's going to take us into the expression builder, so we can control the expression for who this email is being sent to and so on. So now we've understood where we can use the expressions, let's just find our way around the expression builder. And like I say, in the next video there's going to be lots more examples of using the expressions as well, now that we're sort of getting familiar with it. So I'm going to just jump into the status tab here, and we'll pick on a field. So maybe subtotal. So we'll go into the subtotal, click onto the configure expressions, and let's just have a look at each of these. So the visible and the enabled, basically these are going to want to return true or false. So if we're returning true, then it's visible. If we're returning false, it's not visible. Likewise with enabled, if it returns true, it's enabled, and you can click into it and enter a value. If it's returning false, then you can't. And you can use the expression builder to set your condition that returns true or false. So it might be that a value is greater than another value or something along those lines, or you're a member of a group or something like that. And like I said, we'll get into some of these examples as we go through. But yeah, these are going to return true or false. We then have the initial value, so that can be anything. If you want to maybe put some text inside a field to explain how to, if you want to explain how to complete this field, then that's something you could use the initial for. You can also populate some user profile properties, which is useful for this one. So for things like who it's requested by, could default to my email address, which is inside my user profile. We have calculated as well, so that is the result of a calculation is going to go into the field. Required, again, is going to return true or false. And then we've also got the validation, which is quite commonly a regular expression, and we'll be getting into some of those validation controls a little bit later on. Okay, so they're the different places that we can use it. Let's just have a look around the expression builder itself. So when we go into the calculated value expression builder, you'll notice that it's got, first of all, 3 different tabs along the top. We have template, assignment, and function. Okay, so template, you can use that to really sort of build concatenations, which is useful. So if ever you've done concatenations before, and I'm just going to use the sort of first name, last name example, if we weren't using a template, if we were using an assignment, what we'd need to do is use operators in order to be able to join the fields together. So we would have things like first name plus a space in quotes, otherwise we won't have the space and it would be like Brett Lonsdale or one word, and then last name would look something like that. Oh, we're missing a plus there. There we go. All right, so so that's going to put Brett space Lonsdale, which would be the return value from that assignment, and that would be stored inside of the field. But using template, there's actually no need to do that. What we can do is just simply come into template and put first name space last name, and that gives us what we want. We don't have to worry about the operators. We can just build a string exactly how we want it to be. So what we can do with each of these is test them as well. So let's say we wanted to generate the purchase order number, for example. What I could do is put PO, which is effectively going to be my string. It's not a field or anything, otherwise I'd have put it in square brackets. And then the ID. Okay, so it's going to be PO ID. So every item inside the list has an ID. So notice that we can test this. That's going to be PO15, and we can test it against a different one, so PO8 and so on. So we didn't have to worry about converting PO to a string and then adding that to ID, which is also converted to a string. Lightning Forms is working this out for us, which makes things a lot easier. But that would not work in the assignment. So in the assignment, we would need to be a bit smarter. We would need to actually do that concatenation, but we can do more advanced things inside that as well. So we would, in that case, have to do a PO in quotes like this plus ID, and notice how we can test that and get that same result. But that would not work if we got rid of the operator and the string and so on. So you can see here that's now returning an error for me. Okay, so that's the difference between template and assignment. Assignment is a calculation using these different operators. So you've got your mathematical operators, you've got your comparison operators, and we've also got not equal to and or and so on as well, and the string operators or quote operators as well. And then there's function. So function is used for creating some JavaScript. So we can put some JavaScript in here. It may be something that returns today's date, or as you've already seen, some other JavaScript for things like the form load actions and so on, where it's doing things like inserting a signature pad. There's all sorts of things that we can do through there. So they're the different types of value that we can calculate using the expression builder. Over on the right hand side here, we have all the different placeholders. So at the moment it's defaulted to all, so we're seeing the fields. So these are all the fields in the parent form, the current form that I'm on, not a sublist. So we can see every single field on the form in alphabetical order, and in order to use these as part of an expression, we can just double click on them, just as you saw me do with the ID column. I can just simply double click onto ID. That adds that to this expression window over here. So if I wanted to build an expression in here that resulted in the grand total, we could have, for example, the subtotal multiplied by, or sorry, plus the sales tax, and that's all we need to do. So we could then pick on a PO, and notice we can test that value, make sure that we get the right value returned for us. Okay, so that's how we can build an assignment using these different fields in here. And as you expand those fields as well, you'll also notice that you can test for conditions. So we've got is changed, is invalid, and get to the original value as well. So these are some of the other properties that we can also get at from the fields. We've then got context values that we can use, and you can get to that from all as well as you scroll down. Notice it says the context objects, but we can get to it from here too. And under context, you've got information about the current form, about the current page, about the current site, the user, and the web. Now, web might be a new term for you, and here's I guess Microsoft's idea of a joke a little bit. So from a user's perspective, we have a site collection, and that site collection is made up of sites, and a site is made up of lists, and lists are made up of folders and items and so on. Not when you're developing. So if you're developing and you're writing code, site means site collection, web means site. So that's the joke part. So this is referring to the current site that I'm in. This is referring to the current site collection that I'm in. So notice the different values that we can get from both of those. We've got things like the culture name. So the culture name is effectively the language and the formatting that you're using inside this current site. So notice how that's defaulting to English US for me. So we can get at the culture name. We could also get at the local culture ID, known as the LCID. So that is also in there somewhere. See, so it's just, yeah, 1033. So 1033 is the LCID, the local culture ID for US English. All right, and we can get to the title of the site that we're in. So notice how it's bringing back the name. And we can also get the URL. So there's the full URL for our site and so on. So lots of things about the current site that we're in we can get at using web. And there's also stuff that we can get at from the current user as well. So this is the current user. We can get the current user's login name. So there we go. There's my login name. We can also find what department I'm in, my last name, etc. All of that sort of information that you see from the user profile. One of the useful things that you can use for enabled and visible is the functions that we've got here that says is member of group or is member of AAD group. AAD group is a Microsoft Azure Active Directory security group. So if you've got Azure security groups defined, then you can check whether the current user is a member of that. That's going to return true or false. Remember that we use inside of enabled and visible properties. So that can be used to determine when to show a button or when to show a field. And if you don't have or don't use AAD groups, you could also use this one here, which is a member of a SharePoint group. And like I say, this returns true or false. So let's say I had a group called sales. If I test against me, it's returning false. So I'm not a member of that group, and so on. Okay, so therefore that would hide a field if that was my condition. So we've also got site, as I mentioned. So this is testing against the site collection. So only expect a URL there to go to the top level site of your site collection, and you've got server relative URL. There's also the ability to query content as well. So you can query from a list and return items. And notice this is expecting the list name or the URL to the list, along with a camel query and then the field name that you want to return. So the camel query, camel stands for Collaborative Application Markup Language. And if you haven't used this before, there is a camel builder. Just Google camel builder, and it gives you a GUI on how to be able to actually query SharePoint lists and content in order to get that out. So basically, you're building a query, but you're using sort of XML format in order to be able to get at the items to be returned. So you can use those. We've also got some information about the page, so the page that we're on as opposed to the site that we're on, and then we've also got the form as well. So we are currently in the new form. So if I double click on is new form, it's not actually giving me what I was expecting, but yeah, that could return true or false. And we've also got is sublist form. We can also get at things like the item ID and so on as well from that form. So they're the sort of context type values that we can get at. And then on the far right, we have sublists. So on our form, we've got a sublist called the purchase order items, and these are the fields inside of our purchase order. So notice in here we've got line total and quantity and unit price, as well as item and description. So I am actually in the subtotal field. So inside my subtotal, I want to get the line total column, but we can have multiple lines, multiple order items. So I want to use sum in order to calculate all of those items, sum them up just like we would do in Excel, and store the value inside my sublist. So notice, yeah, I guess I can't do it from this perspective, but that is all I need as a function in order to be able to calculate those values. So I'll stick with this one because we're actually going to use it. I'll choose OK. That's going to calculate this subtotal for me from the line total column inside my sublist called purchase order items. Okay, so that's a quick exploration as to where you can use the expression builder and how to use the expression builder. Like I said, in the next video, we're going to dive in a little bit deeper and do lots of examples of some of these expressions. Okay, many thanks.